What I never imagined was that he would have a plan already in place. And he'd held you up against the wall by your neck because he did flare up like that. Well, he was a narc. Why didn't you do that? Narcissism wasn't even a phrase in those days. Imagine this. You've just come home from seeing a solicitor. You've got 3 children. And you have recently found out that not only has your husband been carrying on with the babysitter, but also he's been carrying on with previous girlfriends, and everybody knew, apart from you. It's well known. It's common knowledge, apart from you, because, you're clearly too stupid to realise what's going on underneath your very nose. And because you'd found that out, and because you knew about the affair with the babysitter for a long time and tried to shove it down and not do anything about it because you didn't want to be divorced, and you had small children, and you were frightened, and you didn't have a proper career to fall back on, and he'd held you up against the wall by your neck because he did flare up like that. You didn't want to do anything about it. You were frightened of telling him. But, all these women, all of this, it was just the straw that broke the camel's back. It broke my back. It wasn't even nice to live with. He was really super controlling. This day and age, they call it coercive control. In my day, it was just called possessiveness. And oh my goodness, he was so possessive. It was horrible. So I came back from the solicitor. I went over there with my little son during the afternoon, and I came back that evening, and I said to him, I have been to the solicitor and I have started divorce proceedings. And he looked at me, and he didn't actually blow up. He didn't get really angry. He didn't do any of that sort of thing. And he asked me why, and I told him because of all these other girlfriends that he'd started relationships with. I mean, there were about 5 or 6. Not even including the babysitter. There were 5 or 6 more. And whilst he's doing all this, he picked up my car keys and he was gradually fiddling around with them. And I didn't take notice. I just didn't take notice. I should have. And he said to me, you think that your best friend is your best friend. I'm not saying her name. Well, she's not, because I've been having an affair with her for the last 2 years, and you didn't even notice. And I said, I don't believe you. I just don't believe you. I mean, he used to say, oh, I bet so-and-so is having an affair. And I used to say, no, she isn't, because she would tell me, because we were best friends. Plus, when Christopher died at 10 weeks in a cot death, she was my only person that cared about me. She came round every day. It was quite a way from her house to mine, well, my flat, and she came round and took care of me every day for an entire year. An entire year. Now you work that out, every single day, apart from the weekends when my husband was meant to be around so he would be able to care for me. And things like that mean a lot when you're suffering. When people show up for you, that is friendship, that is love, that is doing love. That's not saying, oh, I'm so sorry that happened to you, love and prayers or whatever. That means nothing. But when somebody constantly turns up for you and says, how are you today? And you say, yeah, I'm fine. And they say, no, you're not. I'm coming round. Because they can hear it. Well, she had been that friend to me every single day. So when he said, I've been having an affair with so-and-so, your best friend. And I said, I don't believe you. I didn't believe him. I thought he was lying. I thought he was just being spiteful. By that time, he'd already thrown a cup of tea at me, which had hit the wall and gone everywhere. I remember that bit. I can't remember how we got to that bit, but there was mess everywhere. Anyway, he stood there and he took all my keys off my key fob, apart from one key. That was my car key. And suddenly he came round to my side of the kitchen counter and he grabbed me by the elbows. And at that time I didn't even have any shoes on. He was still holding my arms, my elbows. And then he called for the children. He called for the 3 children who must have been hearing this to-do in the kitchen. They were 4, 6, and 7 years old. And he marched me to the door, shoved me onto the doorstep with my one key, and said to the children, say goodbye to your mother. Go on, wave goodbye. And bless them, they stood there and they waved goodbye to me. And I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe that I had handled it so badly. I never expected him to do that, because if I tell you, this husband of mine had never once bathed the children, had never once got them ready for bed, never ever taken them out for the day, never actually done anything at all for their care. Not once. Even when they were tiny, even when they were babies. He was the man of the house. He didn't change nappies. That was women's work. It was none of this, oh, I'll take this feed for you, darling, to give you a night's rest. No, I'm the man. It's important that I get my rest. This is your job. This is women's work. This was, 40 years ago. Things have changed, thank goodness, but it was like that then. We were just, or should I say I was, less than nothing. Even though I worked all day in the house, and believe me, I did. I worked really hard in the house. I vacuumed. I was much better then, but I vacuumed every day. I dusted every day. I washed the floors every day. And why was that? It was because his mother was held up as some kind of example to me that I had to attain. And when I think back, she wasn't house proud. She wasn't particularly clean in her house. But I had to conform to this thing that he thought I should conform to. So I did all of that because, when I met him, I was 14. And by the time he threw me out, or I was going to leave, I was 28. So I had been with him on and off for half of my life, from a child until I was 28. So when I get comments like, well, he was a narc, why didn't you do that? Narcissism wasn't even a phrase in those days. Plus, there was no internet, there were no mobile phones, nothing. You had your house phone and you had your landline, and that was it. So, no, I didn't realize he was a narcissist. I didn't realize that our relationship was being coercively controlled by him. And he was abusive, verbally, physically. It was all of that. And you see this woman before you now, but I was nothing like that then. I was this mousy-haired little mouse that wouldn't say boo to a goose because, frankly, I was too damn scared. If you have come from a background of trauma, and believe me, living with my schizophrenic mother was like walking on eggshells 24/7. It's hardly surprising that I went from that kind of environment to the environment being married to a coercively controlling man who constantly called me ugly. I see that now, but I didn't see it then. Boomers all around the world would be saying, yes, I did that too, because that's how we were. The man was the kingpin of the house. You had his dinner on the table by the time he came in from work. Otherwise, you were a sloppy housewife. And frankly, no one wanted to be like that. You were called all sorts of horrible names. And everybody wanted their washing out on the line on a Monday, and your whites had to be white. And your children had to be clean and tidy. So this was about 6 o'clock in the evening when he threw me out. And I went into the car and I drove to West London to my aunt's house. I hadn't rung her because, I wasn't in the house. I didn't even have a purse. I didn't even have any money at all. I only had this key. If I were doing it these days, I would have planned and I would have put money aside. I was working, but every bit of money that I earned at my little jobs of cleaning or party planning went back into the house. There were no funds for me to go out on a Friday evening and get a babysitter like he did. Well, he didn't get a babysitter because he had me. But even when I went out working, I had to get a babysitter and pay her to look after the children just in case he wanted to go out. Now, how is that fair? Anyway, I digress. So I went to my auntie's. I had no idea what I was going to do. I didn't know how I was going to get the children back. But I was banking on him not wanting them. I thought that as soon as he'd had them for a week, or even a couple of days, frankly, he wouldn't want to be bothered because he'd never, ever bothered before. Now, here's the thing. What I never imagined was that he would have a plan already in place. His sister was married to a chap who had a sister. Yes, his brother-in-law had a sister. And she couldn't have children. And she was staying with them, and he had met her already. So I don't know whether the affair with her was already starting, but Anyway, he took up with her. Within just over a week, she was then living in our house and looking after the children. I never banked on that. She was a nurse, so I thought, well, she can't be terrible. If she's a nurse, at least, she'll be looking after them properly. And if she can't have children, then, maybe she'll be able to be kind to my children. But I was in dire financial straits. I had not a penny, not even for petrol. And I had no credit cards, not in those days. So when I got to my auntie's, she allowed me to stay. And she was a very strong woman, and she was appalled at his behaviour. And I was in pieces. Anyway, I had to find a job. That's the first thing I had to do. And I did find a job. But, going to a solicitor is expensive. Plus, within a few days of living at my auntie's, he'd stolen my car. Somebody had driven him up to West London, and he'd used his spare key to steal back my Honda Accord car. Now, the car was mine, but he'd kept it in his name, like everything else in the house, all in his name. Although my name was on the house, so thank goodness for that. But I still didn't have any money, and by that time I had no car. So I was having to get a bus everywhere if I wanted to go to an interview. Eventually, I got a car on hire purchase, and I got a job working in a betting office. And I started putting money away. By that time, he'd moved down to Devon with this lady, taking my children. There was no question of I'll ask. He just did it. So my journey to see my children was 2.5 hours away. He would not allow me to see them unless I'd made an appointment. And it could only be for an hour. It wasn't an open-ended, come down in the morning, you can have them all day. No, it was, you have to be here by, say, 11, and they have to be back by 12. So going anywhere specific wasn't on the cards because our time was limited. And I knew he did that so that, I would be driving for 2.5 hours. I'd be collecting them and seeing them for an hour and then having to drive all the way back again on my own. He was deliberately obstructive. Sometimes I'd phone and say, can I see the children this weekend? And he'd say, I'll let you know. And of course he wouldn't. He would just play these really childlike games. It was pathetic. And this carried on. It carried on for months. It carried on for years. Eventually, when I met my second husband, this had been going on for 2 years by that time. And sometimes he would say, the children don't want to see you. So what can you do? You can't say, I'm going to see you. So sometimes I wasn't able to see them because they didn't want to come out with me. And I suspect, or I know now, it was because he was saying all these nasty things to them and there was nothing I could do about it. He wouldn't let me talk to them on the telephone. Anyway, I got married to my second husband, as you know, if you've listened to my life story. And after a couple of years, we had a baby, Katie. And my children, by that time, didn't want to see me at all. Not at all. But they were curious about their half-sister. So they contacted my parents and they arranged to go and stay with my parents, their grandparents, for a week. But I wasn't allowed to go down there. and see them there, because apparently they didn't want to see me. But they wanted to see Katie. So I had to meet them in a hotel in Eastbourne, leave Katie with them so that they could take her home and show the children. And then later on, I would have to go and pick her up when they were out. And it was just so divisive. And can you imagine how that felt? At times I used to think, is this ever going to get any better? Will they ever realize that this was not my fault? But I didn't want to be one of those parents that, as soon as I got the opportunity, told them what a so-and-so their father was. Because I just don't think that's helpful. Plus, I had been in that position with my mother and my father when they divorced. I would go to see my father, and directly I came home, my mother would pump me for information about him. She would constantly tell me how terrible he was, and that was awful, and I found it really upsetting. So I wouldn't do that to my own children. But I did believe that one day the truth would out and they would find out about their own father, because I don't think that he could play his card so close to his chest forever. He used to say to them, "You're lucky I took you on, you children." Actually, he used to say, "You're so lucky, you kids, that I took you on." Well, what does he mean, took them on? They were his children. Oh, the mentality of it. Anyway, it got to the point where my eldest daughter wasn't talking to me at all, but my second daughter was fascinated by Katie. So she started writing to me and saying, "Can I come and visit?" So of course, yes, I desperately wanted her to visit, and she would come for a couple of weeks in the Christmas and summer holidays, and that was wonderful, and she had a lovely time. And we would meet my first husband halfway, and he would we would meet halfway at a motorway services, and she would come to my car, or then go from my car to his car. And she told me that when he would drive her home, because he had all the children in the car, he would give them a terrible drive. He would drive fast and erratic, and it was all designed to frighten them. Because he used to do that to me when I was in the car. So, one day, she wrote to me and said, "Mum, can I come and live with you?" And I said, "Yes, absolutely." I didn't need to ask my second husband. I knew that that would be okay. And she cited several reasons why she did want to come and live with us. But he wouldn't just let her go. He said, "Over my dead body, and I'm going to court." So I said, okay. And we hired a solicitor, because by that time I did have the money to do that. And we went to court. We had to go to counselling. There were all sorts of hoops that we had to jump through. But after about a year, I think it took about a year of finally getting to court and seeing that we could get her. And he was not happy. She came to live with us, and I was thrilled. Well, my eldest daughter and my son were still not speaking to me. And, obviously that was horrible. Especially when they would be on the phone to their sister and they weren't able to talk to me. And I suspect it was because my eldest daughter was in the thrall of her father. She was a daddy's girl. And my son just wanted to be his father. So, it wasn't going to happen. Anyway, I knew it affected them, but I didn't realize what was going on in that household. To this day, he is still saying, "I took you kids on," which is just frankly the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. You can't take on your own children. But that's the kind of person he was. He was forever a martyr. Fast forward to when my daughter that came to live with me had by that time qualified as a podiatrist, and she was working for me. And I was babysitting for her, looking after my grandchildren. At her house, I would go there at about 6:30 in the morning, and then I would be there until she came back at about 1:30, 2. And we split the work of that practice down the middle. And one day I was looking after my grandson and my granddaughter, and the phone went, and I picked it up. And she said, this lady, she said, "Is my daughter there?" And I said, "No, I'm terribly sorry. She's not. She's out at work, but I can take a message for you if you like." And she said, "Mum, is that you?" And I said, "Yes. Yes, it's me, is that you?" And she said, "Yes." And then we talked for about an hour and 40 minutes. It was wonderful. It was if there was all the years and all the hurt had melted away and there was nothing but absolute joy. It was wonderful. And we have been in touch ever since. It didn't happen with my son because he was still in thrall of his father. And, nothing was going to happen there. I just had to be patient. But I was. During the years that have passed, when I've been talking about my past with their father, my eldest daughter has said to me, "Well, that's not how I was told it." And I would say, "How were you told it?" And she would tell me, and it was nothing like the truth. History had been not just massaged, it had been completely reinvented. Completely. It bore no resemblance to what had gone before. So I don't blame them for not wanting to talk to me, because if you had listened to his tales and suspended credulity, you'd have thought I was the most dreadful woman in the world. But when I would say to her, "Darling, don't you think that with 3 small children under 3, I couldn't possibly have done all of those things, had all of those affairs, had men queuing around the corner to see me? When you don't drive and you go everywhere by bus with your 3 children in a buggy, what kind of opportunities do you think that kind of wife would get to behave in the manner that he's saying, especially when he does come home to check on you throughout the day at any given time? What opportunity would I have had? Plus, in the evening, I would go out to work with my best friend. We would go cleaning on a tandem. When did I have the opportunity to behave like that? And she'd say, yeah, now I come to think of it, Mum, you wouldn't have. But, I was only young then. So, unfortunately for my oldest daughter, my first husband, had been extremely controlling and coercively controlling over my oldest daughter and my son. I suppose without somebody to do it to, and because I'm their mother, he transferred it to them. I didn't know that, but it's come out in the years past. That information has come to light through conversations that I've had with my daughter, not my son, because my son is incredibly loyal, even though his father is quite dismissive of our son, to the point which I told him if he didn't start being nice to our son and treating him properly, I wrote him a letter with all the things that I knew about him, and I sent it as an email. And some of the things that I knew about him that were true, obviously, could get him in an awful lot of trouble. And I said, unless you start being nice to our son, then I will let him know. And I've never seen somebody go round to see their son and try to be nice so quickly in all my life. And yet his son is still terribly loyal to him, and he'll say there was blame on both parts. He won't hear it. But I'm not out to try to change his mind. I accept him for what he is. Although that bit is a bit disappointing. Nevertheless, he is a loving son. Now that I'm older, I can see how my behaviour puts me at a disadvantage. But, it's all right having the advantage of hindsight. Had I have known that my first husband would have got a replacement for their mother within a week, I would have clung to those children, and he would have had to have punched me out of the door. But frankly, I was so shocked. I couldn't believe it. And plus, he was big. He was a builder. He was very strong. And, I wasn't that person that I am now. I just wasn't. I was just a beaten down person. I was that little mouse. These days, he doesn't occupy any of my mind. He doesn't occupy any part of my brain, unless, of course, I'm talking about him on here. I couldn't care less what he's up to, what he does. My children tell me he's not happy. Means nothing to me. How did I get my son back, you might ask yourself? Well, in 2011, I think it was, September, I had a Facebook account and I very rarely looked at it, but one day I looked at it and there was a message from my son, and I was shocked. And he said, that he had had a long time to think, and that he wanted to reacquaint himself with me, that he wanted to get in touch and reestablish our relationship. And it was wonderful. He was living in the north of England, and so my husband and I drove up there, stayed in a B&B overnight, and went to see him and his wife and his children. And it was fabulous. And from then on, he stayed in touch. And then at one point, he wanted to move down here with his family. And to enable him to do that, he lived with us whilst he found a job. He lived with us in our loft for a year. And he did eventually move down to this part of the world, and he got a new house, and he's very happy down here. He's very hardworking, so I don't see him very much, but he is always on hand should I need something heavy lifting, because he is a big, very big, strong fellow. I don't make demands on my children, and I don't guilt trip them if I haven't heard from them for a while, because I know they're busy. And whatever time they spend with me is a gift. My oldest daughter always phones me from her car, and we have a long conversation. She is a radiographer, so she has these very technical conversations with me, and for the most part, I don't understand what she's saying, and I tell her. But she does enjoy her job, and she does enjoy spilling the beans, spilling the tea on what is going on in her life, especially at work. And I am able to just listen and give advice when she wants it. So that is lovely. The daughter that came to live with us in my second marriage, it was very sad actually. I don't know why. Well, I do. The second daughter that came to live with us in my second marriage, I haven't spoken to since 2010. She proved herself to be very much like her father. I never appreciated how much like her father she was, but eventually, I think always giving in to her and accommodating her created a massive stick which she could regularly beat me with. And that would be even to complete strangers that neither of us had met before. You know, maybe it was a chiropractic appointment or something like that. And she would just be horrible about me in front of me. And I would be so shocked I couldn't say anything. And this kind of covert bullying would carry on until one day I thought, I can't do this any longer. One day, my second daughter, who used to work for me, asked me if I could have the children for the weekend, babysit them at my own house. Now, I was nearly 50 and in the throes of the menopause. Not that I knew it. I just knew that I had terrible brain fog. I was constantly boiling. I just didn't know what was going on with me. And I knew that I couldn't cope with a 3-year-old and a baby in my house. It just wasn't set up for that. I didn't have a staircase. I didn't have anything. And to be honest, after looking after them in the mornings for that time, I was literally exhausted. And I said, I can't do it. I'd love to, but I can't. I could come to your house and try, but I can't have them at my house. It's just not set up for that. And she got very angry indeed, and spiteful. And so it transpired that when I would go around to look after the children after that, so she could go to work, she wouldn't speak to me. She wouldn't say a word. She'd hand me the diary, or she would say to my grandson, "Give this to your grandmother." And she would hand me over my portion of the money, and then she'd open the door for me to leave. Like, you would treat your cleaner better than that. This went on for weeks. And I just didn't know what to do. So eventually it got so bad. And she would leave things out like she was searching for a house in the north of England, and she was going to buy a hoof house. Now, Peter Hoof, the architect, makes these beautiful light-filled glass-walled houses, and they were my favourite of all-time houses. If I ever became wealthy, then that's the house that I would have. And she would leave all these plans out for me to see. And eventually she had sold her house and things were going well on the move. But she had stepped up with the bullying. So one day after I'd finished and been dismissed from her house, I went home and I said to her, I sent her a text. It was cowardly, I know, but I couldn't phone her because I knew she would harangue me. She would harangue me, and I never was very good at arguing. So I sent her a text and I said, I am finished with being bullied by you. I can do this no longer. Please accept this as 6 weeks' notice. You don't have to work there. I will work it myself and give you the money instead. From that moment on, I didn't see her. I didn't go around anymore to babysit, so I wouldn't be bullied. And at the end of that 6 weeks, I totted up everything that she would have earned. I gave her a £1,700 chiropody drill. I gave her 2 sets of instruments and this money. And that was it. What I didn't realise was that all those months when she was getting very angry with me because I wouldn't have the children, she had been siphoning off my patients, rubbing them out of the diary, putting them into a diary of her own, keeping all of the money, booking them without letting me know. So my earnings were down to less than half. And given that that was my only form of income, and I had all the outgoings of the practice as well, the rent, the rates, the bills that go with it, I didn't realise that, and I hadn't realised what she'd been doing. But by the time I went back to doing my job full time, I had a fraction of the patience that I did have before she did that. And then she moved up north, and I haven't seen her ever since. She would, of course, send me calendars with the children on it. But when I asked what they would like for Christmas, I would send it up. She wouldn't reply. I'd send it to my daughter, and my daughter said, "I'm sorry, Mum. She told me not to tell you, but you're not allowed to buy them any presents. You just had to buy them and then they'd be wasted." I mean, that's awful. So, we've not been in touch since. She's also not in touch with any of the rest of her family because she's done the same to all of them too. So she's clearly very much like her father. Now I hope that puts a line under "what about your children?" My children are fine. Even the one that I no longer speak to has got a career, so she's fine, as much as I know. And eventually, they all found out what their father was like because he showed them by his continued actions. He didn't stop having affairs just because I'd left him. He has had affairs in his current marriage. So, leopards don't change their spots. And my oldest daughter very, very rarely sees her father. I don't think she's actually seen him for the last 2 years because he is so abusive and controlling. And unfortunately, his wife is the same now. But then she has lived with him for a long time and it's obviously rubbed off on her too. If you wouldn't mind sharing this video or liking it, that would be truly wonderful. It would just let the algorithm know that I'm doing something right at last. That's the end of this part of my life. And I suspect is a little bit rambling. But if you haven't seen the rest, then YouTube says you might like to see this one. And if you have been, thanks so much for watching. Lots of love. Bye-bye.